I want to talk about a concept called Communitas. Has a root word that's the same as the root word for community. And Communitas was coined by an anthropologist named Victor Turner. And he got this concept from studying tribal rites of passage. He wasn't the first person to study them. Arnold van Gennep in the early 1900s studied the initiatory rites of children as they become adults in tribal society, something he found in every tribal society, and he began to look for the common features. And the three features that Arnold van Gennep identified, and which to this day are considered the three parts of the rite of passage, was the separation, the initiation, and the return. The separation from family, by elders who are going to guide you, the initiatory ordeals, which is what he called the liminal period. It's a period of no status. You're not in the old world or in the new world. You're not a child. You're not an adult. You're in this liminal transitional stage, and that's when you undergo the ordeals of transformation, the new names, the new dress, the secrets of the tribe, whatever's given to you to make you an adult. And then you come back and you are expected to become an adult, to behave as one, and there's no middle ground. So you're fully, freshly minted adult when you return to the tribe, and you're welcomed back, and you're believed to bring a new energy back to the tribe through the ordeal of transition. Now you've got something to offer. It's the beginning of the understanding of the identity of who you are to become in the world, what the ancestors have given you. There's a lot of other things embedded in that. But the aspect of this three-part separation, initiation, and return. The initiatory moment was what interested Victor Turner as an anthropologist, and he wanted to know what's going on in this sort of liminal, not here, not there period, this transitory period. He began to study the way initiates related to each other and the kind of deep sense of connectedness they felt, and he immediately began to look at that in the present world, where you see people in similar like boot camps, or he was looking for places where individuals come together. They have sort of a common agenda, or they create one in the coming together. And he began to expand on this more and more, and he stopped just looking at initiatory type rituals, but he began to look at when people come together and some of the features that happen when people congregate, whether it's something more dramatic like an Episcopal church revival, or whether it's a cult, or where a group of people are hanging out and sharing thoughts over coffee, or a couple on a first date. There's some features that he sees in this, and he basically makes the case that human beings must do this. And there's a couple of important features in this, and understanding them helps us understand some of the behaviors we observe in sort of hero figures like politicians and athletes when they fall from grace, most often through some sort of sordid affairs that they have outside of their primary relationships. Those tend to draw a lot of our attention, sort of a voyeuristic look at other people's private faux pas. But what Victor Turner was looking at was what happens when a group of friends or collaborators or even strangers get together and start to have discourse. And one of the things he noticed is that very often there's a very heightened sense of intimacy and connectedness. As people take an idea and share it, another person shares an idea, maybe someone adds a story to that, and that adds another idea, a thought, and something starts to brew among people. It's a phenomenon which he called Communitas, and it has some very distinctive features which are important to understand. One of the most striking features of it is a heightened emotional sense of connectedness, and also the beginning of utopian ideas will often infiltrate that conversation. Like you begin to imagine great things that you might do, or that people might do, or that collectively culture might do, or society might do. There's a tendency to want to envision and articulate something grand and great that people can move towards. There's often a lot of emotional excitement in that. There's a very important feature that happens between individuals in Communitas is there is an immediate surrender of statuses very often. So, you might have a boss having drinks with the workers, and they might start relating to each other in a way where the status of hierarchies of boss and subordinate begin to disappear. And this is a critical feature of Communitas, is that people surrender their statuses. They want to be able to relate as equals. And Victor Turner claims that this is a phenomenon that's inherent in our psychology, that we live in society where two things are going on all the time. We see statuses and hierarchies in terms of people's access to power, to resources, and we also, on a fundamental level, don't believe those are representative or fair. That we see them as maybe a necessary evil to have society run. We need hierarchies and people in power and people with more resources. Maybe we don't believe that, but there's a part within, according to Victor Turner, within everybody, which says statuses and hierarchies and divisions and differences and inequalities are fundamentally flawed, and at the bottom kind of baseline of everything, there's an equality that exists. Everybody is equal on some fundamental level, that we all hold that to be true, so that therefore we see the societal structures of status and roles and differences as being something unfair, unjust, and inequitable, and fundamentally maybe a transitional point in our development, that we know it to be wrong. And so part of what Communitas allows is for individuals in the engagement, emotional connectedness, to get rid of the sense of statuses and differences for a moment, and to treat one another as equals. So that's sort of the emotional context within which Communitas happens. There's a sense of connectedness. There's a sort of a reaching for some sort of utopian idealism often, and then there's a breakdown of the status differences. Now, another feature of this, which he calls the pedagogical feature, and I'm not entirely clear on how, as I understand pedagogy, it relates, but it's sort of the frame within which we must understand Communitas and how it relates to culture, and it's this. So aside from the emotional connectedness, the utopian values, the sense of statuses having been removed, we're all equals, recently Obama sat down with the Republican leaders for lunch to hang out and chat, and I know that part of what motivates that kind of a connection is an intuition that I want to be equals with these men on Obama's part. I want to be able to relate to them not as president, but as an equal to talk about what the country needs. Because I think he's driven by that kind of a value structure, irrespective of what other manipulations he might have in mind, that he's wanting to meet people as equals. And so aside from those fundamental emotional connectedness, lack of status, utopian idealism that emerge in a Communitas moment, I'm thinking of a couple on a first date. Very often that's sort of like this incredibly intense emotional connectedness and an idea that something grand is happening, if it's a good date. But this pedagogical feature that Victor Turner describes is very important in the context of how culture evolves. And it's this. He says that within Communitas, the outside of any collective group of people, there is culture. And I say it's outside because it's the things that when you step out of the room, once again, there are laws and rules and values and beliefs and habits and customs, and every cultural group has different ones. But they're the shared collective values, ideas, beliefs that guide and sometimes restrict culture and restrict cultural movement. But they often also keep cultural cohesiveness. So maybe an idea, for example, that it's okay to drive a large vehicle, or perhaps that it's okay not to recycle everything, or perhaps that it's maybe 150 years ago, perhaps it's okay to enslave the lower races, which was a sort of a shared collective belief. However abhorrent that seems to us now, to most of us, that was something collectively shared to such a degree that it allowed for institutionalized slavery. So that's the cultural frame within which everyone lives. Well, what Victor Turner said is that during Communitas, in the state of Communitas, as he studied it in many, many different groups, indigenous and present world groups, he said that cultural frame begins to get fragmented and broken apart and reconstructed in that moment of connectedness. It's almost as if people challenge the paradigm, challenge the status quo, challenge cultural values and beliefs that might maybe inhibit utopia, that might sustain the inequalities, the status differences, and there's a tendency to want to dismantle those. That's a common feature of the moment of Communitas, and he says it can get very extreme, as in the form of cults, where they not only dismantle it, but they make all their own rules that really fly in the face of status quo values and beliefs. And the other feature of a cult is that he says it's no longer Communitas because they're building walls around themselves to protect them. They're becoming status quo. So it's a very delicate thing, but what I'm very intrigued with, and the thought I will leave this tribal jazzman scholar presentation with, is the idea that It is the moment of Communitas in which we begin to assemble value systems and beliefs and ideas. I wouldn't want to say an ideology, but ideas that might cultivate a more utopian world. And it's that process of Communitas which is a necessity among human beings. We must gather, whether at a Jimmy Buffett concert, at an all-night rave if you're a teenager. It's what drives people like, to name names, Tiger Woods, Clinton, Bill Clinton, to deviate from their status so that they can be unequal. And very often when you're at a very high level of power, influence, and status, and there's a high expectation that you will remain and conform to it, then the desire to break away and do something that deviates becomes very, very pressing and very strong. To experience Communitas, for Bill Clinton to share time and passion with an intern who has very low status is partly about, irrespective of what his proclivities are, it's partly about dismantling statuses. It has an aspect of Communitas embedded in it, however malinformed it becomes and how ineffective it is. But it's a feature of human beings that we want to spend all night at a rave. There's a beautiful dissertation written by an Irish woman who studied the groups of youth in Cork, the working class youth who were in these two very, very violent opposed gangs. And on the streets during the day, they encounter each other, and it's not a good thing. But they would attend these all-night raves that included some drugs and all-night music, techno music. And the phenomenon which intrigued her was that they described their connectedness during the rave as being one of a brotherhood and loving each other. But when they're on the street the next day, forget that the rave is done with. They're no longer in that connectedness. So she was studying it in the context of Communitas and what's happening in those experiences. So we have all these manifestations of it. And it really is about, from the perspective of an anthropologist, it is about creating a connectedness that dissolves these unjust inequalities and statuses, these limitations that we've created in society. It's about dissolving those. It's about envisioning utopia. It's about restructuring and reconsidering how culture might better suit the needs of a more egalitarian and more utopian world. So Communitas is with us. It's here to stay. And if we understand that, we might begin to frame a lot of behaviors we see, some of which we like the rave phenomenon. Many people are very concerned about what are youth doing. And we need to understand that part of what they're doing is they're trying to, in an intuitive, instinctive level, reconnect and dismantle oppressive or unjust structures as they see them. Even though they might not say that and they might not know that, it's a human need to evolve culture. And one of the ways we do it is through creating opportunities for connectedness and Communitas and for all the utopian values that become embedded in that. And with that, Tribal Jazzman Scholar will sign off. Thanks for joining me.